Hi there, Randy Green here, and welcome to course 2 in the whole project Changemaker series, where we are exploring what it means to be a changemaker in this reality that we are part of, with all of its weirdities and extra dimensional features that most people normally don't talk about when we talk about becoming a change maker. In this course, we're going to work under the headline of learning to become a chaos pilot. I want to start this series of podcasts with a little envisioning, a little kind of different approach to how to work with an idea. And we are already in course 1, we talked about the patterns of change and how everything is built up energetically, and everything begins as what we call an idea. And what is an idea? An idea is a complex information system that is connected to some form of field, whatever that means. And that means it can be an emotional driven idea, which goes with emotional fields, or it could be a mental driven idea, which then goes with the mental fields, but it can go far beyond that. So we're going here when we're becoming chaos pilots. And I like that word. It actually comes from here in Denmark years ago. I think it was in the 80s. You know, I have a background within business. That's why I talk the way I do when I approach these ideas. That's the correct way to do it. But I also put the psychology in, which is not just kind of what we call organizational psychology, which most business people rely on. They are looking at psychology as a tool for marketing, a tool for organizational build-up, so that psychology is used to become more proficient, right? It's about making people more efficient and at the same time more professional, and at the same time having a higher performance rate. So that's what psychology is used for within business. So that's kind of okay that it has its place there, whereas psychology within family dynamics, of course, have another template that is run of that one, as well as psychology that goes with dealing with childhood trauma, etc., etc. So psychology is many different things, all depending on who's using the tool. But when we talk about chaos pilots, it goes back to some of the things I studied in the 80s. And there we actually had a Danish company. We had 2 interesting Danish companies, which I kind of looked into. They have fizzled away because Denmark is not really the place where you are this huge change maker or game changer. We are a collective of quite content people that are quite content with just living their everyday life and don't really need the big inventions, not in the same driven manner that we're seeing in the rest of Europe or other places on the planet, to be honest. So even though we are a Western culture, our value systems are slightly different than other civilizations around the planet. We are a comfortable people because we live in our little Holocene Goldilocks country, where things are quite arranged for us, and we have a pretty good social network, etc., etc. So anyways, to put that one in context, so you kind of understand, well, when people are inventing something here, they're actually inventing it because they like being creative and not because they have to get food on the table, to put it that way. So therefore, there are not many inventors because they get food on the table, so they don't have to come up with a great idea from where they can rise from rags to riches and be billionaires overnight. We're not driven by that. We're not driven by that recognition, so to speak. We also have a little thing that is it's a picking law we kind of have in Denmark. Not as much anymore. YouTube has changed that. But before we got online and back into the internet and so what was going on around the world, we had kind of this old farmer nobility built up as know your place, know what you are, know who you are, and do what you do best, and don't try to be something that you're not. You're not a wannabe, don't be that. Just be what you are and do that best, right? So know your place. Not, of course, in the Hindu caste system approach, but a little bit kind of as in, if you are a farmer, if your dad's a farmer, you become a farmer. If your dad's this, then you become that. And of course, we had in the 70s where people broke out of these dynamics and began studying at the university, which changed our culture quite a lot. But it's still a subcurrent because it's a huge part of our culture. Again, we need to know our cultures when we talk about innovation and we talk about how to drive business, because it is determined by the societal culture, as in the society that we're part of, but it's also driven by the culture within the business and our own culture and self-perception, and where we see ourselves fit in, what role we have, and how sternly we are driven by inner impulses. But back to that program. There was the program I found very interesting that was called Pathfinder. It actually were alluding to some Native American methods of finding the path, so to speak. Anyways, that's not where I want to go. But the Chaos Pilots. The Chaos Pilots were a kind of psychological program that went into the understanding that people that kind of survived enormously chaotic childhoods and learned how to work with these dynamics and make it their strength would actually become quite skilled innovators within business, because they already had learned all that chaos, all of that being part of an environment that were constantly working against them. And then by that learning to thrive, to transform, and to navigate that enormous amount of chaos and still come out in the other end with success, and often with brilliant ideas, because they were turning all of their weaknesses into strength. And we are talking the SWOT analysis. Again, we talk about strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And in the first series of podcasts, I was talking a lot about our weaknesses, your weaknesses. I had them as well, but I work with many of them. That's why I can point it out in you, because I've dealt with my own weaknesses and say, well, Randy, your weaknesses are not my weaknesses. No, but I've talked with so many people, and we are not that different. Okay. We are not that different. So weaknesses, turning that into strength, and also what are our strengths, and knowing to notice these, as in, I know one of my strengths is the innovator part of me that wants to pick things apart, but I also want to put them back together. And I have respect for picking apart. And I'm very cautious about putting it back together, because the reason why I want to pick it apart is actually because I want it to become more functional. I want it to work better. It has flaws. It's not working. So I'm picking it apart, and then I put it back together. And then the idea is that I transform and mend and oil it and do whatever I need to do with it, aka the clock or the bicycle I mentioned in the previous series of podcasts, and turn it back into a functional whole where it then works better. That's a strength I have, and it drives me. I did the same with myself when I kind of left my marriage and left the base program in the early 2000s and started all over. I picked it all apart, every single thing of me. I took it as I did with the clock or my bicycle, and I looked at it and I oiled it and I transformed it, and I threw things away that were no longer useful. And I went out buying new parts, so to speak, inventing new parts of myself, so I would work in a manner that I could be proud of. That's a strength I have. I am a scientific inventor that at the same time also have a huge respect for what I'm dealing with. And my goal of inventing things and changing things is actually to make it work better. Again, according to what? According to what it's engineered for, the purpose of it, the original purpose of it, the root of it, the cause of it, why it's there. So that's kind of so built into my DNA. It's part of my original template. And probably one of the reasons why I volunteered to become part of the LPU, right? Because I knew how to do that. I knew to take broken things, damaged original consciousness units, and by creating design programs and specific developmental programs, be part of re-engineering these. And of course, it was interesting to work with technology, but I was not with the arms over my head as many others were. I had this respect for the project that we were embarking on. At the same time, I just had that subconscious feeling there. This is not going to go well. We're talking about really flawed genetics here that survived the previous universal cycle. Do you really think that a little piece of technology attached to it will then change it? Anyway, it's just an open question. So the Chaos Pilot, and I want to work with that, even though I'm kind of stealing the idea a little bit. So I can't remember the guy that came up with it. He was a very inventive guy and he had some very good ideas. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. But he used the Chaos Pilot idea to work with people that were within what we call really strange psychodynamic environments as family settings, and how they survived these enormously strained childhoods, and how they came out on the other side and often became these enormously change makers, to put it that way, because they had really been conditioned into thinking in different ways. And I can say in many ways, we talked about my childhood as well, when my dad left and my sister, she left home. I was 11. I was left alone with my mom. I was drinking too much. She had men coming in and out, and finally she teamed up with a guy that was younger than her. He was smoking cannabis, and my childhood home from there on was chaos all the way through and through. Screaming and yelling at nighttime. I didn't get my sleep. When I did fall asleep, I woke up in panic because they were yelling at each other, throwing things, always getting fucking drunk during nighttime. And then they decided to, let's discuss our relationship, right? And then screaming and yelling at each other. I was just upside, just thinking, what the fuck, on the second floor? And I was just kind of, oh man. So that was not good. So, and plus then when they were making up and all, so much chaos. So much chaos. And before that, when my mom was in her low, she was all drinking and miserable, and I had to pick her up at the bars and all the nasty men at the bars. So you kind of know there, when we begin talking about why am I so obsessed with the males as being kind of one of the flaws in the system? Well, probably because I have a series of experiences that goes with the bad side of what males are. But just ask any female on this planet, and there's a reason why the Me Too was there. There are 10% good guys. The rest are really, let's be kind and say they are dysfunctional into different degrees and really do not know how to do things, which of course goes with their genetics, the Y chromosome. There is a reason for it. It's part of their function, right? So if we kind of look at it scientifically, quite simple. There's a flaw in the program, right? Is there a chromosomal feature that goes with a specific type of consciousness structure, and that has not progressed as it was supposed to. It didn't in the holographic metaverse. It didn't after the timeline event. It didn't before the timeline event. You see where I'm going here, right? But with, as I said in the previous series of podcast, females, we are yet to discover all of our flaws because we have been kept quite dormant under the old world order program as breeders, mothers, daughters, good girlfriends, what have you. And we have barely began scratching the surface of what we are holding in our subconscious and what is wrong with the X chromosome. That will be the test for us within the next 9 years, when we will get really amplified by the second cycle more than males. Of course, males will be affected too if they have an X chromosome that is oriented towards the fourth cycle before the fall of Atlantis and prior to that, of course. So we have barely begun understanding our weaknesses, and that's why we need to be chaos pilots. We need to learn to navigate in chaos when we are in chaos and when our surroundings are in chaos, and how to get through that as intact as possible, and at the same time repair and mend while we're going along. And the only way to do that, there's more to it. You could say, well, that's just one podcast, right? You can just end here. We kind of get the idea, right? Yeah, but let's elaborate on that one, and let's try to expand it into different aspects of what it means to be a change maker. So you are a change maker, a chaos pilot, and at the same time, this great creator, engineer, inventor type. So you kind of get all of the features of what is necessary that we need to have the right resilience in the years to come. Because what is the key ingredients in a chaos pilot? Resilience, as well as strategic thinking and the ability to be in an emotionally enormously stressed environment and still keep your head more or less cool, not always, most of the time, at least in this situation, which I have experienced quite a lot of times. You recall me talking about when I was run over by a car and how I responded in this situation, how time was slowed down, how my body just knew, I just knew with my body, that little training I had in self-defense when I was 14. I just knew you need to fall here, you need to do this, you need to do that, take care of your head. The same as when I fell down the stairs in Australia. I was pushed down the stairs in Australia. I did the same. Don't fall over the cliff, do this, do that. And time slowed down so I could think about my movements and what was going on. And you can say, well, that was probably the grace that did that. So you experience that time is an illusion, which we know. as well as once I came where I bent off the car because I did all the right moves. And fortunate for me, I already got the alert before I got hit by the car. I knew she was not observant. I could see that. I knew she was going to hit me. I knew it was inevitable. I didn't need to. I'd already began braking the brakes on my bicycle, and I did what I could to avoid the impact as much as possible when she was turning. If I hadn't blocked my brakes and I hadn't bent off, if I hadn't done that, then it would have been a raw impact, right? And I would have tilted over the car, as you've seen, because I was coming downhill with quite a lot of speed. So I was already on top of it before the event happened. And then afterwards, she came out, was completely shocked. I took care of myself. I took care of her. And then at some point, I also allowed myself to be enormously angry, and I was yelling at her and I was scolding at her and saying, what the fuck? Literally saying, if you don't know to be observant when you drive a car, you shouldn't be driving a car at all. You see, that's me. I'm kind of this one. If you don't know what you're doing, don't fucking do it until you learned it, because this is what we owe to each other as a high performance culture. We really owe to each other to be at our best all times. And if we can't be that, stay home until you are working at your best. Seriously. And it's not about denial. It's not about suppressing everything, because we work through our processes of not being at our best, so that when we do come out on the other end, we have learned so many things. And that's one of the core traits of a chaos pilot, is that we navigate through the chaos. We learn by it. We really build up what we call a holographic overview of the situation. We see all of the aspects of the situation, and we thereby, literally in our minds, are running over all of the situations step by step. I can still recall what happened during the incident. Seriously, I can go right back into it. All the steps, all the sensations. My senses were heightened to such a degree that I, in that moment, literally got photographic memory. And at the same time, I also took care of myself emotionally. I took care of myself physically. I took care of the others in the situation, but I also needed to teach her a lesson. There was another woman that came for our aid, and I gave her appraisal for being there for me and being kind, even though I didn't like her touch me, but she did. She was a kind person. I also said, that was nice of you. And then I left the situation. I was still in a high amount of shock. I was completely in shock. I had never been run over by a car before. Same as when I fell down the mountain or the steps in the mountain in the Blue Mountains in Australia. I managed the situation. I was on my top. I took care of the kid. I put up the good face because there was a child present there, so she wasn't to see me freak out completely. I did whatever I had to do in the situation to keep up my best appearance so that nobody around me would be traumatized by my trauma. And then I dealt with my trauma afterwards. I kind of went up to my room and I was shaking. I was feeling uncomfortable. I tried to call a friend who didn't respond. And then I thought, okay, I just need to go out, because the kid was still around and the mother had to take care of the kid. So I put up the good face, and then I went out to the beach and I screamed and I yelled and I cried, and all of the emotions came out there. So this is what you're capable of if you are a chaos pilot. You know when you are to respond. You're not denying yourself the response, but you can postpone it until the situation is suitable for it. And then you can collapse and do what you need to do to get yourself back together in the process. Because everything, when we work psychologically, has to be processed. We need to go through these different processes of whatever is in us, because otherwise it'll just build up until it becomes some big burst of something. A little bit what happened in the first series of podcasts. I kind of had that one in me for a very long time, more or less my entire life, with this whole kind of, not that I'm superior or anything, but I'm built differently. I respond differently. I handle weakness differently. Put me in a situation with a high amount of stress, a high amount of danger, and I get completely clear, because I'm so accustomed to this by my childhood upbringing. All of this, I'm literally being trained for chaos in my childhood, so that once I got over all my self-pity and all of the suicidal thoughts and all of my old memories and karmic imprints, which also many of them includes men killing, raping, slaying, diminishing me, patronizing me, you name it. It's part of my programming to really look at men and say, yeah, I'm not supposed to be with a partner. That's not what I'm here to do. So I'm programmed in that way. And my body's part of that one. And as far as it goes back, it kind of has a different programming. There is traits of going back to tribal awareness, but that's in the version of Australia that existed a long time before the current type of Australia. So that's very interesting to have that memory of civilizations that used to exist there before the indigenous people were seeded in. So that's also interesting. But anyway, so the whole point of this one is how we are put together when we're facing danger, and how we are navigating when we are facing chaos. And I want to play a little role play here, because there's not going to be much introduction other than this video. It is a kind of the introduction to the second course, but I'm just blasting through from the first course where we kind of touched ground with the SWOT analysis, where we were looking into our weaknesses, we're looking into our strengths, and we're looking into the opportunities we actually had, the opportunities of why should we do this? We should do this because it gives us leverage. It gives us skill sets. It gives us the ability to go to the negotiation table with whoever will be here in the future. And it builds up our original energy system. It learns us to transform energy. Whatever we're experiencing there, when we learn to deal with our weaknesses, which is what the psychological work I did with myself and got beyond my emotional field and into my strengths, because I learned to deal and transform my weaknesses. So some of them dissipated, others were transformed into strengths. There I really began to understand my unique skill sets and what everybody was telling me, that's the wrong way to be, because I was not a full cycle tribal member. So therefore I was not part of the group, right? But there I just learned that's because I'm not supposed to be part of the group. I'm a forerunner. I'm supposed to be part of the fifth cycle and begin to build in these different versions of reality that we need, that humanity need if we're going to survive the futures that are coming our way, as well as learning to be around the enhanced humans and whatever will come our way in the different forms of a human body or in the different types of societal structures that will arise within the next 10 to 20 years. And those of us who have the alternate reality perception, what will come with that? Because those of us who are going to be in this physical reality, we will also learn to exist in the alternate reality. So we will learn to perceive on both levels, and more of us will be more and more centered in the alternative and alternate reality settings and less within the enclosure, because we know it's a dying program. It's a dying world. It's built upon dying technology and dying cycles, or if you like a less dramatic word, it's built upon viability timelines that are losing their viability. They're using their coding. They are breaking up. The technologies are breaking up. Everything that's upholding that program is falling apart. So therefore, of course, we have to change so that we are getting ready for the transition out of these programs. Unless, of course, you are under the event program, factional control, or have been put into the retirement programs. Then you will not do this transition because you are not geared for it, literally. So what I want to play with here is a little bit we have talked about, I want to plant an idea here as in we have a lot of skill sets to learn. This is not just something you wake up one day and then you can do this. It takes an enormous amount of time to learn to deal with the cubes. But most of the time I've actually dealt with the cubes as in taking them down. So what would be the opposite kind of idea? Let's play a little bit cartoon here. We're doing a cartoon child movie where everything is good and fine and everything. There's a little bit of a drama, but not the really big drama here. It's just a little scratchy on the surface drama that just gives a little bit of psychological push, right? Not the big world wars and collapse of systems and what have you. So we are here talking about, okay, you begin to activate your radiation field, or I begin to activate my radiation field, which I have for a long time. But anyways, I've been using it to take down old technology, transform old technology, get rid of the Pleiadian cubes that were highly reverse engineered, get rid of the infected Syrian cubes, which were completely there are core genetics, which are part of the cube systems, were infected, and thereby they have become black cubes and were run by the Dark Avatar Collective, Dark Technology, Orion Technology, AIT Technology, and all of these kind of things. AIT Technology, Alien Invasion Technology. So that's kind of what that is. AI Technology, AIT, as I call it, because it's not artificial intelligence. That's something that humans have come up with. We're here talking about invasion technology, alien invasion technology, or alien interception technology, or alien intrusive technology. You decide yourself. They have different features, all depending on the coding and the type of genetics they affect when they launch onto a person, and by that begin to alter their code systems and change them profoundly into something else, which only bleeds through when a person is around another person that operates on the same dimensional layers. This is what we call that's the function of the AIT. It goes in and it kind of infects the person on certain levels, which the human will not detect. But if that human then comes around another person that actually has begun the activation process to a higher degree, then that AIT or coding, infectious coding, will go in and literally wipe out the other person. So that's some of the things that I experienced and I learned the hard way in 2018. And that has taken me a long time. That's why I just secluded myself for a very, very long time, because I knew, I had battled all of that technology, but of course it had kind of rippled off and it had imprinted, and I was dealing with the issues of the Y chromosome, the Leviathan genome that's connected to the Y chromosome. And I'm not here saying the Leviathan as a creature, I'm saying the Leviathan genome that goes with some of the ancient code systems, similarly as the second cycle code system, which females are going to battle later on, is the Tiamat genome that were part of the second cycle human creations, so to speak, after the timeline event, which to begin with was of course made for good, but unfortunately due to the infection and the contamination and the flaws in the genetic engineering led to what we could call a completely inverted version of the original purpose of what it was. So you can say that light coding were turned into dark coding. But let us play with this idea that we're kind of saying, okay, so cubes are not just a good thing, but let us play with that idea that for some odd reason, and I actually do think it's possible, but let us say for some odd reason, I'm working through my genetic composition and I am working within what we call the radiation field makeup, and I'm using the holographic lattice grid. Let's just use that envisioning similar to computer programs, right? You use that lattice, that grid structure, where you kind of say, okay, you have that structure and onto that is a cube connected, and you center yourself in the middle of that one. You choose a nodal point in that holographic network. You choose a nodal point that connects to specific code streams that goes with the reality field holographic unit composition, and you attach yourself on that nodal point by using your heart field to navigate into that center point of that version of the holographic grid you want to become part of. And it's kind of in that moment that locality becomes local, because you're centering your peripheral sphere or your influential sphere around that nodal point, which you connect to via your heart field. And you here use a specific type of symbol. Then you blast your energy, that's the thruster, up to your mind field and further up, using the consciousness units to code and recode the cube above your head. That's technically how we use the Pleiadian memory cubes to do so. So we didn't have to store everything in our mind. So we could use it in the cubes, which is why we also have to some degree what we call Pleiadian cubes, but they were borrowed from the idea of the Syrian cube systems, because the Syrians are the ones that came up with the cube as we know of it. This similar to the sim cube that you are seeing above people, the avatar. They have this weird I keep forgetting the English word for it, but this 8 pointed, the two pyramids that are put on top of each other, right? So you have one that works upwards and you have one that works downwards, and that's the one that goes into physical matter. That's the lower level coding of it. And you have the higher order coding of it that goes upwards towards what we call the elevation processes. And it technically drives through that spiral movement upwards or downwards within what we call the progression or regression spiral. So that's piece of the technology where you kind of say the holographic teaching system of the Syrians were built that way to ensure that you would by your actions would then be stored in these memory cubes, and then that would determine whether your consciousness units would progress or regress. And that would then be downloaded into you, and via the holographic teaching system, you would then learn by your mistakes and you would self-adjust, and your code system would then be expanded into your perceptions sphere, where you would then see all the things that you've done wrong, and by that you would correct it because you were in that holographic imagery. That visual or virtual reality would then create in your perception field. You would see all the things that you needed to correct before you would actually go out and integrate it into reality. So that would be a benevolent use of one of the cubes. The question is, do you have the strength to discern between the cubes and the age of the cubes and how destroyed they are and what they technically link up to and what they have been reverse engineered into? And that's the great problem, because many of you are kind of seeing these cubes, and my advice to all of you is just dismantle it completely, erase the code systems, get the parasites. They have a lot of parasites attached to them. Get to the racial grids, get the elemental, get the craft, get the technology, and then free yourself of that cube, because as things are now, they have not been used correctly for 15,000 years. And they have a lot of stored stuff in them that probably is not of our greater use. But there is, above many of the cubes, there's actually a 6-dimensional sphere, and that goes with the original program of our reality field. But that sphere only responds to you if you have the original codes activated for the principles, the laws, and the rules, and your exemplified transformative energy system dynamic that follows the original purpose and function of our solar system. Then you can begin to operate the spheres. And the spheres, I would have less doubt about actually beginning to interact with and see what can I integrate from these spheres, which is also technology, but it is in a different type of density 2 type of matter that is would for many look as kind of light spheres, but they are not light spheres. They're not orbs, nothing to do with that. But the orbs kind of comes from the same idea that if you take away the more manifest version of something, you can then turn it into this light orb. And that is technically how most of us are going to leave this system once we die, with the few viable genetics we've got left at that point in time. And that's how it's pushed out in the gate systems, unless you, of course, are doing it as part of a releaser, which is my job. I typically give that energy that normally is the orb energy to be able to exit the gate system. But when we leave, and when I leave, we will have to have built our whatever remains of our own transformative energy system. And that becomes the light orb, which will then encapsulate what is left of our original viable genetics. And this will only happen if we are following the original dynamics and sciences of the restoration program. Otherwise, there will be other ways you will probably leave this reality. Okay, I talk about these kind of things in the template sciences as well, so this is just a little bit of a catch up. But I keep talking about we can begin to utilize these technologies. I've not gotten to the point yet because, as I said, I don't mind picking things apart, if that's the word to use there. I don't mind dismantling things. But I need to know, once I've done that, I kind of need to know what's inside before I begin integrating it into my energy system. Because if I'm not fully on top of all of the floors of this system, that means I need to know exactly what type of genetics that we're dealing with here. So I might go to a cube and say, oh yeah, it's 90% Pleiadian cubes of the original origin, and therefore I can create certain types of holographic programs with it, which I can actually use to recode my energy system into more or less original holographic Pleiadian level of the emotional field, which would be possible. And with that, I technically could use that to amplify or change and reset the code systems of plants, for instance. So that would be grand if that could happen. But we know that the Pleiadians have had a lot of infection. We know the Pleiadian system was taken out by the Orions, and we know that the Pleiadian genetics that were used in the military projects, they had a backdoor built into them, which were not visible until they got in contact with 8th dimensional energies. They were not ignited until the dark Orion cubes came in 2018. Until then, they just looked like beautiful Pleiadian genetics. Then the cubes of the AIT came in, and then the back door opened, and then they got infected, and then they changed into becoming something entirely else that was so susceptible for possession and takeover. So that's the problem with this. It's not that it will easily and quickly early on begin to be part of our expanded awareness and alternate reality perception, these different technologies that are left in our system. The question is, how viable are they, and can we reboot them? Can we work with them in the right manner? Can we recalibrate them? And not until we are in complete control of our own energy system should we embark on that journey. But once we master that one, that's another opportunity in this very hostile environment. We're talking SWOT analysis here again. That's an opportunity. But it could also be a huge threat because we don't know what we're dealing with yet. So when people are saying, why even bother doing all of this? Because if we can get beyond the limitations of our human emotional mental field disconfigurations and get back into our original capacities, there is technology we can work with in our holographic realities. And it would be possible if we could get one of the original Pleiadian cubes up and running as it was supposed to, get beyond the infectious layer and get beyond the backdoor inserted Orion technologies and what's been the code systems, pull it apart and reassemble it, and then ignite it up to its true core potentials. Or if I could get one of the cubes that Sotis used when she was here, that would be grand. That would connect to a craft, which I can see. So I know it's there. It's a master cube. It's a huge one. And it's connected actually to one of the crafts she left behind before she took off. She didn't take all of her technology with her. So that is still there. And I know some of the Giza complex have been hunting for that one because they had certain ideas that they could actually do with that one, except on the fact that most of the ones that were in the Giza complex were males, or the females that were there were so contaminated that wouldn't be able to activate it. Similarly, as when I was in Australia, where they tried to get me to activate some of the Pleiadian crafts that were dumped in the ocean due to some of the Orion Pleiadian wars that took part over Australia in very ancient times. So again, and these crafts, of course, not visible. It's not as, oh yeah, dive down with the submarine and then you'll find them on the seafloor. Not at all. They are in the fifth dimension. So you have to be able to operate there. So if we could do that and begin to connect the good technology to our energy system, we would definitely have a say. And if that were possible for humans to do so, we would be able to tear down the enclosure. That would be one of the opportunities we would have if we would be able to master that technology again. So you can kind of see that's also why they are doing whatever they can to prevent us to get to that level. Because if we do get to that level, we will have something, we will really have leverage, and we will actually begin to get back into the original position that we had as part of the solar system and the civilizations that used to be here. So this is also one of the reasons why those of us who do have the fifth cycle potentials, we are going to fight even harder to activate than the fourth cycle. We are going to deal with a lot of what we call the reverse engineering in the fifth dimension, including the third cycle issues, including the dark ones, including all of that stuff that is really, really nasty. Whereas the fourth cycle, of course, they have their dealings to do with the parasites and the cubes and the elementals and the takeover and the distortions and all of these things. So each level has its own challenges, so to speak. But as we learn to navigate through these different realms and rings of distortion and develop our internal and external equipment to do so and get the skill sets of a chaos pilot, we will learn to steer our plane of existence through these wild storms of energy that we will encounter constantly. And we'll actually at some point, not because we like the adrenaline kick, but we will learn to have enough confidence in who and what we are so that we will not be threatened to the same degree. And we will slowly but surely connect the way our amygdala are actually working. We will not be stressed by it to the same degree. You're seeing that with soldiers that are in in stressful environments. If they don't develop PTSD, they learn to manage that one, and they slowly but surely alters their amygdala to respond to fear and adrenaline and stress in a different manner that gets them through the situation. And because they have that confidence and they manage to get through the situation, even though they've been through hell, they still come out on the other end with a little bit of PTSD, but not this handicapped version of this what you call it, really dismantling version. That's not the word I'm looking for, but some soldiers come out of wars with PTSD that is crippling them, that prevents them from ever functioning normally in human life afterwards. Of course, some of them are connected to the underworld, no doubt about that. It's part of being a warrior or a soldier in some of the regions of our planet that are connected to the underworld. It's not just a battle that's going on the surface. The battle is infused with different forms of entities and genes and what have you, which they of course cannot see. And that's part of the trauma they carry with them back home, because they still have it in their energy fields. So they never left the battleground. They're still battling in dream time in the underworld. So that's kind of fueling that stress, adrenaline, powerlessness, this feeling, I don't know how to deal with this. And if we could work with some of our soldiers and actually get them to give the alternate reality perception, they will understand, okay, there's actually more going on here than just what we call terrors of war, because I've been pushed into horrific situations where I had to go across every single thing, every single value I have of what I think humans should be and humans should do, including the primitivity that arises within males when they are put into war situations. And we have females that can respond to that energy as well. So it's not just males, but typically there are more males than females in armies, right? And they are participating in wars. So just to put that thing in context, so you kind of say, okay, there are more at play here when we talk about changing reality. We have the ability to link up to some pretty advanced technology. And I am in contact with all that technology, but right now I'm just taking it all down because I don't feel equipped enough to actually begin to recode it and take the ramifications of that one. So right now I'm playing a little bit safe, because here there's a lot of stuff I want to do first, so that when I finally get to the point where I say, okay, now we can begin to implement the cubes. You have the sciences, the pioneering work, the understanding, the code system, the template, the progression work, the skill sets of a changemaker, chaos pilots, you know how to build business in systemic dynamic energies, which again is a double interpretation of the word, because you both have system thinking, you also have systems within business, and it's also dynamic. It is based upon processes. So you understand that whenever we create something, it's a process product. It's never just one thing. It's always up for refinement and processes, and it needs to adapt to the changes in the environment. So that's the system dynamic thinking model of business. So that's a double or triple pun intended on that one, which I will go deeper into, because you already have some of the ideas in design thinking processes that also goes into lean thinking, and some of these new models of how to create products that are more in alignment with what consumers want, but also are adaptable so that they can change all the time. We have iPhones as a good example of that one. So we have this whole design thinking where we create versions of things that will keep changing, all depending on what the consumers want, so to speak. So that's part of process products. But I want to push it further than that, as in kind of saying, well, we need actually to put our process product to such a degree that they almost become holographically changeable, so that we almost by thinking, almost by connecting to the original technology of our system, can begin to create a new type of program that will then manifest a new type of product, which is what the algorithms and the computers are doing for us right now. But it can be done by human consciousness as well, if only we learn to work with our holographic reality field in the right manner, learning to work with the lattice or the grid of the holographic structure that we are part of, learn to work with the vibrational energies, learn to create the influential sphere, learning to use the radiation energies used to activate the thruster, learn to activate our consciousness potential, and then by that learn to connect to the technology that's upholding this reality field. Because the LPU is built upon technology. Every single thing you find in this universe and all of the other universes that were part of the LPU have connection points to technology. Nothing here runs on pure consciousness. Everything is connected to technology. And that's the good technology, the bad technology, and the really ugly technology. So we kind of have that one as learning to discern between the different types of technologies, be it crafts, be it cubes, be it spheres, be it the ones that uphold the illusion, which we called our reality, be the event program, a reality program, what is upholding the gateways for the crafts to come in and out of, the foundational understanding of crafts, which can have a cube in the middle or can have a sphere in the middle, all depending on the symbols of the different forms of code systems, the different forms of organic versions of life forms that are operating these crafts and cubes and spheres and what have you. Some of them are unmanned. They don't have any human, any alien, anything in them. They are just purely connected to the construction itself and are fueled by the construction itself. So the technology, the augmented construction itself runs its own technology. So that's also part of it, which we can connect to via our consciousness. And by that, technically, we're part of altering our reality. So that's also part of some of the ideas behind being a chaos pilot, because we are in a system that is falling apart. So what does that imply, and how do we work from the highest level to the base program with these alternate reality understandings, and how far are we going to push that? That's also triage. It's not just about hunting down the cubes and saying, I want to learn how to use the memory, play it in memory cubes so I can change the environment and help building up sustainable environments where people can thrive by making plants unfold their transformative features, and by that help drawing out the methane gas in the ionosphere or what have you, because plants can do a lot of stuff. We know that, right? And we can enhance them to be even more operational and more transformative, actually turn them into a lot of other stuff, not just by tinkering with their DNA, the plant DNA, and modify them and all of that bullshit. But we can actually go to the original technologies and the original programs that are upholding the plant kingdom, and thereby learn to work from a whole different level, which is also a possibility. And that is what, when I talk about people that choose to be farmers in the future, that's how you're going to work. You're going to work with the technologies of this construction, of this world you're part of, so that your plants will unfold their original potentials. And you train that by beginning to learn to figure out what is food and how does your nutrition work and how does it work with your physical form, and what are the transformative features of you and what you're eating, and what's the idea of why you're eating, and how can you optimize that so you eat less and you produce more energy yourself, and not relying on outer sources such as the sun, which has been shut down, and not the reality grids, which many will begin to pull in energies from. And that's also why we're going to have a lot of rising up from the underworld and the racial grids in the 2-8 pillar cycle that we are heading towards, because people are no longer being fueled by the sun, and they don't know how to produce energy themselves. So they have to get it either from food, and if they can't get it from food, then their body will naturally seek downwards and begin to seek it from the reality field grid itself. And that's one of the things that took out the population on Mars, by the way. So they depleted the racial grids. And once that had happened, they were forced to begin to build some of these artificial features as we know as the grays. Not that they originated there. This has happened other places. The civilization on Mars left Mars before that happened. But other places in our universal structure, they were not that fortunate. They didn't have other places to go. So they built these cyborg, semi-android, fully android kind of vessels that were not in need of any form of energy infusion, including no eating and no relying on any sources, outer sources of energy, because they were not transformative. They closed themselves off entirely. And you need to be a machine to be able to do that. Okay, so with that blast away into this first video of learning to become a chaos pilot, I will of course explore further in the upcoming videos, unfolding this stream of information as it rightfully should be said at this point in time. And later on, we will of course refine it. We will work more in depth with it once we know going further into the 2.8 activation cycle from 2025. And if we know that if we could have catched the 2025 timeline, then our chaos piloting will be somewhat different. If that is not possible and we have not been able to get into the 2025 timeline as portions of the collective, including the enhanced humans, well, then we will have to navigate with whatever's left on this planetary system and all of the environmental disasters and everything that is waiting ahead of us in the future. And it will come. It's not going to go away because we have crossed the deadline. We have gone beyond that point of no return where we cannot just by making little slight changes make everything good and well and just say, oh, I'm sorry, that everything is good, because we have foundationally messed so much up, including that the original program and the event program and the alien technologies and everything is falling apart because humans constantly choose the wrong decisions, make the wrong decision, choose the wrong solutions, and by that are distorting themselves and their surroundings even further. They are really not willing to let go of all of their old ways. Instead, they are doing whatever they can to preserve everything that is no longer functional. And that is what takes out an entire reality field. Thank you.